Would you mind giving a formal introduction to the listeners of who and what you are according to you, and also an introduction of who you are according to your good doctors and those who are your victims?
Certainly. Hello, my name is H.G. Tudor. I am a greater elite narcissist. To the good doctors, I am a narcissistic sociopath. And to my victims, I am many different things. Well, it's interesting that you say that they don't have any empathic traits, because what you might actually be dealing with is an individual who is actually a narcissist, but presented with a fake empathy, which is fool people. So it's often the case, and I've come across this in my interactions on my blog, where you will have somebody come along who I can tell is a narcissist. Mm-hmm. I will not tell them that because I know they will not accept it. But I can tell that what they do in their interactions is they attempt to show that they are empathic, and they truly believe that they are. But actually, their actions are narcissistic. And they can certainly fool some people who are not skilled at determining the differences. But it is apparent that in actual fact, they are a narcissist. And some people would be quite surprised that you may find somebody who you would think, well, they seem so caring, and they look out for people, and they always seem to exhibit empathy. A lot of it's done for a facade. And without wishing to name names, you can often find this with some quite prominent and famous people who you would think, well, actually, they're known for being caring, etc., and charitable. The reality is they're one of us. They just have a very cunning and clever facade. You often find this appearing in organized religion.
Yes.
So it is complicated in terms of understanding how people present. And of course, we are masters of mimicry. So there are those of us who have the sufficient cognitive function to mirror certain behaviors. I can appear empathic because I know how to frame my expressions. I know what to say. I know what to do, but I don't feel it. I just know what to do, and I'll do it because it'll serve a function. I know it's expected of me in a crowd if an old lady falls down to help her to her feet. And I would do that, not because I care about her, but I know that she'd be grateful, and the crowd around me would think, you're an able-bodied young man, you ought to be helping her, and I want to maintain the facade. I don't feel anything for her distress. I merely have known through observation and copying what the appropriate response is to engage in. And you will see with the less developed of our kind, that moment where there is a frozen expression as we try to work out what the appropriate response is, as the brain catches up and works it out and decides, yes, I should look like this. If you know to look for it, you can see it happen quite often. It's the mask carousel as we try to work out what expression we should be exhibiting to you.
I've seen that. That's interesting you said that, because that just triggered some memories. I've definitely seen that a lot. Yes. Now that I think about it. It's almost like a robotic,
yes.
It's like a robotic, malfunction.
That's right.
Wow. Okay. Well, that kind of goes right into the next question. In understanding how social media, chat rooms, and dating sites are a heaven for narcissists and psychopaths, I have personally been able to spot people who fit all areas on the spectrum, from greater narcissist to super empath. I also know of many victims who have ended up in relationships with narcissists that started online. How do lessers, mid-rangers, and greaters go about choosing their targets and prey online? What are the do's and don'ts that people should know on how to protect themselves from online narcissists. What should people look for in behaviors and creative expressions from people online to alert them that there is a high chance that they are a narcissist?
Again, this is a hugely expansive area, so I will endeavour to be succinct. In terms of how do we go about choosing targets and prey online, the explosion of the online environment and also the access that technology provides has created a playground for us, or perhaps more accurately, a hunting ground. It means that we can access many different prospects at any time we choose, and we can also find out a lot of information about individuals for the purposes of targeting them. Now, the best fuel comes from our victims when they are physically proximate to us, rather than through an electronic medium. That said, it often starts in that way because so many people engage now electronically. And the online environment provides us with both the means and the information in order to carry out our targeting. How we go about choosing our targets. My book, Sitting Target, goes into greater detail about this, but essentially we look for empathic traits, certain class traits, which align to the type of narcissist that we are, for example, somatic or cerebral. And we also look for damage traits, which tell us that this person is perhaps particularly vulnerable. And as a consequence, they're online. We would look, for example, if you take somebody's Facebook profile, if the individual has plenty of pictures of themselves and they are physically attractive, then a somatic or an elite being a hybrid of somatic and cerebral, will be interested. If I can see from your Facebook profile that you've travelled a lot, that would appeal to a somatic or an elite. If I can see that you post memes reflecting that you miss a deceased parent, that is an indicator that you are an empathic individual. If you post lots of pictures of your cats or your dogs, animal lovers are empathic individuals. If I can see that you posted lots of photographs of family reunions, that tells me that you get on with your family and you place great stock in the familial relationship. Therefore, that tells me that you exhibit empathy. The fact that you posted the French tricolour in a year ago November, when there was the attack in Paris, tells me that you exhibit empathy. And so there'll be a whole host of indicators that tell me whether you've got empathic traits. It will show the class traits, and it will tell me if you're damaged as well, depending on how much information you put out there. And people put a huge amount out there. They will check in on the places that they go to. They will post photographs. They will be tagged in other people's photographs. By looking at your Facebook profile, I can often establish where you work, so that would enable me to try and find you if I wanted to. You might post enough information for me to work out actually where you live. You'll say the town from which you hail. You may post exterior shots of some building work being done on your drive, and I can see your house in the background. So that would enable me on Google Street Maps to ascertain which street that you lived in. You detail the films that you watch. I look at your comments, and that tells me all about your worldview, your political views, your religious views. And this plethora of information is categorized into empathic information, class information, damaged information. And the more that you have on Facebook, Twitter, we can see all of this, and it helps us identify. So, for example, if I see every evening you tend to post a lot on Facebook, that tells me that you're probably quite lonely and you are in on your own. And if you make reference to enjoying a film with a glass of wine, that tells me again that you might just be on your own, and therefore you would be susceptible to somebody taking an interest in you. So there are those are just a few examples. There are thousands of ways that I can identify my targets from looking at you online. In order to protect yourself, the simple fact is stay off social media. That's the most effective way. Of course, that's not practical because, one, why should you have to do that and be prevented from doing something that you enjoy engaging in, and something that allows you to connect with normal and healthy and ordinary people? So you should always ensure that you have the highest level of privacy settings. Never, ever accept friend requests from people you don't know. It seems obvious, but people do it readily. And that's how we often hoover you as well. We will also utilize a methodology of not necessarily diving in and befriending you, but see who your friends are and try and become friends with them first, so that when we send you a friend request, you see that you've got mutual friends. And even though you might not recognize us because we've created a false profile, you must think, well, I must know him or her from somewhere, so you accept the friend request, and then we have all of the access to your information. So you need to be circumspect in the information that you provide. It's astonishing. I have seen people who've provided their telephone numbers, their dates of birth, where they live on certain profiles. And if I engaged in financial fraud, I would have a field day in creating identity theft. So you need to be circumspect about what you post online. You need to be careful about understanding who might be following you or becoming friends with you, or who's looking at your profile. And in terms of alerting you whether you're being engaged by a narcissist, invariably the way to determine this is in terms of the messaging that occurs. It might be on a dating website or from Messenger on Facebook. A narcissist will look to move you off that platform onto telephonic communication pretty quickly by wanting to swap numbers. So you can engage in texting or speaking on the telephone. You will put under pressure to meet pretty quickly. A somatic or elite will want to see pictures of you and will readily offer pictures of him or herself. They will ask you a lot of questions, and that's further mining you for information. Now, you might think that a narcissist would want to talk all about themselves, and they will. But at the same time, they will be mining for information to find out more about you in order to mirror you. So they will want to know what you'd like to do. And if they've not been able to glean this from your social media profile beforehand, and you've only got a certain amount of information, say on your dating profile, they'll engage in a lot of question asking to find out what you like and don't like in order to then mirror it so that you are drawn closer to them. I have, for instance, written about the online somatic narcissist on my blog, which provides you with an excellent example of how a somatic narcissist behaves online. And if you read that, that will provide you with plenty of indicators of what to watch out for.
Okay, that was that was great information. And I've read your articles that deal with what to look for from online dating sites and social media and things like that. But just hearing you say certain things, I got more from it just from listening to you.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Do lessers, mid-rangers, and graders have different areas that they frequent for targets based on their levels of narcissism?
There is some applicability based on the school of narcissist, but the more determining factor is the cadre of narcissist, namely victim, somatic, cerebral, or elite. So the victim narcissist is a fairly pathetic individual who's looking for somebody to effectively mother him or her, be cared for, and consequently, the victim narcissist tends to look for people that work in caring environments. So hospitals, care homes, medical practices. Somatics will be found hunting at gyms, swimming pools, high-end shops, exclusive restaurants and bars. Cerebrals libraries, academic institutions, particular clubs that have a cerebral bent, and elites, because they're a hybrid of somatic and cerebral, will naturally use those places that I've just described for somatic and cerebral. Of course, the greater, being more sophisticated, will have a wider range of areas that they will frequent. They tend to perhaps be places where more successful people are accessed, but that does not mean that a greater is beyond attending somewhere which is perhaps a venue you would be slightly surprised to find him, because what he's looking for, of course, isn't more of his people, but those people that are empathic, but also interested in similar things to him, so he knows that they will be a prime victim for him. Lessers, being less sophisticated and cultured, etc., will have fewer hunting grounds. So it might be, let's say you have a lesser somatic, he only bothers looking in the gym and at a local bar, and leaves it at that. A mid-range cerebral, passive-aggressive in nature, is not going to be outgoing, so more likely to embed himself in, let's say, a stamp collecting club and identify people there who show empathic traits. They have a similar interest, and therefore he knows that they will be of intelligence, which appeals to him, so they will have opinions about the world, that they will keep abreast of current affairs, for example. So you need to consider the school of narcissism, so lesser, mid-ranger, or greater, and the cadre, victim, somatic, cerebral, and elite. And there are various hunting grounds. Again, I detail those in sitting targets, so you can look in there and determine what type of person you might be, what are your class traits, for example, so which type of narcissist might you attract, and then realize the places that you're going to, and then you might actually realize why it is you keep bumping into wholly undesirable people. It's because you're wading into a hunting ground.
Yeah, that that makes a lot of sense. Wow, the breakdowns, it just, it's clicking. It's just making a lot of sense for me.
Uh-huh.
Wow. So are you an elite narcissist?
Yes.
Okay.
So I look for somatic and cerebral class traits. So I like to keep myself in shape physically, but I wouldn't say that I look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I'm not heavily somatic in that sense. And I'm an intelligent man. So I want somebody who can voice an opinion. I want somebody who has an interest in the world at large, not somebody who only watches reality television, for example. Now, if I found myself in a situation where I was struggling for fuel, unusual as it might be, then any port in a storm, and if there's somebody who will provide me with fuel, then I'll latch onto them, but I would soon jettison them in order to find somebody that was more better aligned with what works for me. So we want to find the victims that will give us fuel, that will provide us with character traits, and that will provide us with residual benefits. And we look for empathic, class, and damage traits to ensure that those three desires are fulfilled. And of course, those traits vary from person to person. And what one narcissist will find attractive, another may not.
Okay. In what you just said, I just had a question that popped up, which is, if you, or whenever you do rarely find yourself in need of fuel, why don't you, I guess, go to your primary source and then like switch the like if your primary source is in the I guess love bombing stage or the devaluing stage, why don't you use your primary source and switch the stage, I guess, that you have her in to fill up your tank, if that makes sense?
Sure. In such a situation where my fuel level would be low, that would occur, for example, if I had no primary source. They may have escaped me, and I haven't embedded a secondary source sufficiently to promote them to become the primary source. So if I have an ongoing primary source, my fuel levels would not run low unless they suddenly escaped. So a situation where I would find my fuel levels low would either be that somebody's picked me up in a helicopter and dropped me in the middle of a desert, so there's nowhere around, and I haven't got a telephone with me. And that would create a crisis for me because I can't find anybody, and I can't communicate with anybody to gain fuel. And so I would start running in whichever direction. The first village that I came to, I would start to engage with the first person I met with in order to gain fuel from them. And if it appeared that I was so far removed from civilization that I was going to have to spend some time in this village, then I would look immediately to find a new primary source from within those people in that village. And of course, I would look to try and find those with the empathic, class, and damage traits which work best for me. But let's say that it's a poor pool from which to choose. I would try and find the most appropriate one in the quickest time available, make that person my primary source. Then with them in place, they would provide me with positive fuel, and I would look to the other villagers to provide me with top-ups of that fuel in a positive way. And then I might pick on one person in order to belittle them, to make me look better in the eyes of other villagers, and for that person to give me negative fuel. So that's a slightly extreme example whereby my entire fuel network has been removed because I've been taken away from it and dumped in the middle of nowhere. For me, as a greater narcissist, because I have a sophisticated fuel network, the realities of the fuel level being low is rare. And it will only happen if a primary source escaped me and I wasn't able to contact any of my other appliances. It's more of a risk for a lesser because of his volatile behavior. He's more likely to drive people away. He has a smaller social network to begin with because he can't attract as many people as a greater does. Therefore, of that small group of friends, and because he has problems with his control, he's likely to lash out. And those people will just think, well, you're a jerk, I'm not going to be friends with you anymore. So he loses some secondary sources. He has a fight with his primary source, and she walks out. He creates his own fuel crisis. And in those circumstances, he would then have to go and find fuel from another source as quickly as possible. It might be turning to the friends, but they turn their back on him because he's been a jerk. So he'll have to pop to the nearest bar and try and chat somebody up in order to get fuel from her. And if it's working, going in the right direction, she starts off as a stranger in the bar, a tertiary source, very quickly becomes a friend and becomes a secondary source. It might be a one-night stand, so it becomes an intimate partner, secondary source. And then he decides, I'm going to make you my girlfriend. So now you're my primary source because of the sudden need to get somebody to provide him with fuel. Most of the time, we need a primary source. The greater of our kind can survive for a period of time without a primary source, although we prefer to have one. Lessers and mid-rangers more or less need them all of the time. If they don't have them, they can rely on their secondary and tertiary sources for a while, but they're not sufficient. And in such situations, that leads to a fuel crisis with consequences for the narcissist whereby they become restless and irritated and dejected and may sink into depression. They may neglect themselves in terms of eating and hygiene, and it leads to some form of breakdown because they're starved of fuel, and the construct that they've created, the false self, starts to collapse, and they feel like their world is toppling in on them, and they become listful. And it's only when they gain a fuel injection from somewhere else that they would then start to recover from that situation.
Wow, that's that was a lot. In the example, the extreme example that you used, where you said, you know, if you just ended up stranded somewhere,
Yes.
I just found it really interesting that the first thing that you thought about was finding someone for fuel, as opposed to like finding water or something that deals with like with survival. So basically, if you were in a situation, you wouldn't even think about a item or like an actual plant or water to keep you alive. You would be on the hunt for a person.
Well, certainly I would be thirsty if I was stranded in a desert and I would want to drink. But I would also be, what would actually be at the forefront of my mind would be the fact that I would start to feel restless because my fuel levels were dropping. And that's what would really, I would be uncomfortable through thirst, but the restlessness and irritation, the sense of emptiness that starts to rise up again, that is what would trouble me more obviously. And of course, I would look for a water source, and in time I would also need to find some food. But whereas a normal individual would be thinking food, water, shelter, a narcissist would be thinking fuel, water, shelter, food. So we have a somewhat different hierarchy of needs, if you will.
Yes, I get it. I get it. It's just, it's such a, this is a mind expanding process when you step into the world of your kind, because you only know what you know, and if you haven't been exposed to the depths of a narcissistic mind, when you start to learn, you feel your brain like expanding into some other unknown territory, and it's just a lot to process. But I get it. I go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, it is a lot to process because people find it absolutely extraordinary, but it isn't to us. This is how we survive, this is how we exist, this is our perspective, and it's entirely logical to us. With lessers and mid-rangers, that's the way they look at everything, and that's why it makes no sense to victims. But it makes perfect sense to the lesser and mid-ranger what he's doing, even though it appears illogical to everybody else. It's just that the lesser and mid-ranger does not know what they are and why they're doing it. The greater has that level of awareness, but will not admit to it, because if they do, they are giving away control to their victim, and we always like to have control.
When it comes to the public, what do you and other narcissists look for to target new victims face to face, and what are some of the things that you recommend targeted sources not do to avoid becoming victims? And when it comes to a possible victim or someone that's been targeted, upon them meeting someone who is possibly a narcissist, what are some initial key behaviors or words that indicate when a narcissist is consciously aware that they are a narcissist? And also, what are some words and behaviors that indicate that that possible narcissist is unaware that they are a narcissist?
In terms of what we look for if we see you in public, a physical interaction, again, there's a massive range. So, for example, if we see you out walking a dog, you're an animal lover. That suggests to us empathy. If we see you in a bar and you are at the centre of the conversation, people are laughing at your jokes, you're evidently popular, socially acceptable. So that will appeal to certain of our kind. If we notice that you are ensuring that everybody has got a drink, or that everybody has placed their order, you're caring about people, exhibiting empathy. If we notice that you are picking up litter, then you care about the environment. You're an honest and decent person. If we see that you are well dressed, then that would appeal to a somatic. If we see the particular places where you're shopping, that may appeal to a somatic. If we observe you playing in a band, if it's an orchestra, that may well appeal to a cerebral and indicate an interest in the arts. And if we see that you're a volunteer, for example, you might be a steward at an event, or you might work for, in the United Kingdom, we have an organisation called St John's Ambulance. So if you volunteer for them to provide medical cover at festivals and events, that shows that you're a caring and empathic person. So there's a whole range of things that we may see. And of course, if we've identified somebody that we're interested in, we will undertake background work to find out more about you, look at your social media profile, perhaps come and observe where you live, look at the places where you frequent, or have one of our lieutenants do it and report back so that we can see what traits you exhibit in your day-to-day interactions with people. So there are a whole different range of ways that you will respond. And often one of the ways we might do it as well is to engage with you by spilling a drink on you and seeing how you respond to it. And if you're immediately apologetic and offering to buy us a drink, that tends to suggest to us that you're quite a caring and honest person, even though it was us that poured the drink. Whereas if you fly off the handle as a consequence of it, yes, that will provide us with some fuel because it's an emotional reaction, but it tends to suggest that you're not particularly empathic as a consequence of responding that way. So there are a whole range of ways, either from observing or subtle interactions with you, that tell us that you may well make a good target for us. And this information is assimilated sometimes over time, sometimes just in the course of an evening, and we determine that it's appropriate to make an approach for the purposes of gaining more information about you. In terms of when you might meet us, in terms of initial key behaviours, words to indicate that we're aware of what we are, you're not going to see that because the lesser and the mid-range don't know what they are, so they can't consciously say anything that tell you that they are aware of what they are. And most of the time, the greater, or being aware of what he or she is, isn't going to tell you, not at first. What we do tend to do as part of the ongoing seduction is let slip certain things to test your reaction. So we might say something like, I'm a bad person, really, and just to see what you say. If you ignore it and say nothing, that won't please us. But if you respond by saying, oh, I don't think you're a bad person, you've been lovely to me, not only does that tell us that you are kind and pleasant, you've also given us some fuel, but you've also not picked up on a red flag and you've ignored it. So that tells us that you are going to remain susceptible to the ongoing seduction. In certain instances, it can become so bold as for us to say, I hated my last girlfriend and I was absolutely awful to her. And your reaction might be, well, that's terrible. You should show more respect for people, to which then we may think, you may not now be a suitable prospect based on that response. However, if you were to say, well, I guess you must have done something to deserve it because you seem such a decent person to me, again, red flag ignored and an empathic response provided. So you would, if you start hearing things like that from an individual, you are probably being seduced by a greater narcissist. The problem you have is that the nature of the seduction will be so charming and pleasant and delightful that even when you might hear such terms, you are likely to ignore them.
If you or someone you know may be interested in learning more about human design and the realm of narcissism, I have developed a new service that you may find helpful. This session will help you learn about your narcissistic and codependent traits, and also bring clarity to your involvement with highly narcissistic and codependent people. Through bringing awareness to these aspects of your individual uniqueness, it can assist you in finding a healthy position on the spectrum of narcissism. To learn more, please visit www.freeyourmindtoshine.com. Thank you all for tuning in and watching. Free your mind to shine. Until next time.